Hello, everyone, and konnichiwa. Welcome to Rebecca Heisman, my guest today for Sleuth Wood, the author of Flight Path.
Hey!
Yes, I'm so excited to see you and meet you finally because we've known each other online for a while.
A while, yeah, but we've never spoken before
Yeah.
right now, so it's very exciting.
But we have a common friend, Sarah Swanson.
Yes, that's
So,
right.
Yeah. Yeah, and Sarah, I've known Sarah for a long, long time. So yes, let me get my questions here. Let's see. So I like to always ask people who join me, what is your background? So you're not a scientist.
I am not.
And you know a lot about birds, though.
Yes. I guess I do. So my background is that I, at one point, wanted to be an ornithologist, a bird scientist, and as a undergraduate in college, way back, I double majored in zoology and environmental studies and thought I was going to go on to a PhD program, and realized shortly before I was due to start a graduate program doing ornithology stuff that I didn't actually like doing my own research nearly as much as I liked reading about and talking about other people's research. Actually having to be in charge of studies myself was kind of not my jam. And so I ended up switching into environmental education. I worked in outdoor education for a while, and I ended up going back and getting a master's degree in environmental education. And then I moved out west to Oregon to take a job doing environmental education. And this is probably way too much detail. That job was in the middle of nowhere in Eastern Oregon, a cattle town of about 180 people, and it was not a good fit. And while I was working there, I met my now husband and ended up moving up to Washington, and needed something to do. And environmental education is not really the sort of thing where you can just walk into any mid-sized town and find a job in that field. And I'd always been doing some writing and social media stuff on the side, and so I ended up transitioning into that, first working for the American Ornithological Society as their communications person, because I had that mix of bird background and outreach and writing and social media background, and then doing a lot of other freelance writing, mostly about birds, but also sometimes about science and wildlife more generally.
That's really cool. So even back further.
Yeah.
Your childhood, were you a nature nerd as a child, or was that a later? Because a lot of my guests have been later developers of nature nerdness.
I would say that I was. We definitely went on a lot of national park trips when I was growing up. We didn't go camping. We weren't a camping family, but we did a lot of family vacations to see national parks and stuff. And my parents liked to hike and things like that. They were not birders. That I kind of picked up on my own. They would put up a bird feeder in the backyard every winter just with seeds in it, just for fun. And I was the one who kind of got invested in identifying what all the birds there were. So yeah, I definitely started college knowing that I wanted to be a zoology major, an environmental studies major. And then it wasn't really until I got to college that I was around a lot of other birders and people who were really into that sort of thing now.
That's cool. And so, so you studied ornithology, but are you now a birder?
I am a birder. I think I am not as serious of a birder as a lot of people expect me to be, based on the fact that I literally write about birds for a living. I'm not really a lister, so a lot of people get very obsessive about their life lists and their year lists and the periodic, a lot of your viewers are probably familiar with eBird, the platform where you can log your bird sightings. eBird is so cool, and I have literally talked to the people who founded eBird when I was doing the research for my book. eBird is amazing, and I feel like every January I'm this is the year when I'm gonna become an eBirder, and I'm gonna do complete checklists every week in eBird, and then it lasts a month because I just don't like listing that much. I just enjoy going out and seeing cool birds. I feel like if you're easily pleased as a birder, you enjoy it more. I can go out and find a spotted towhee and be cool, towhee, I love those. I don't need to see rare birds to enjoy it. Right. So I don't know. Yeah.
No, I agree. I think I had a list once, but mostly what I do is I put a sticker in my book when I see something.
Nice. And so that's a good way to do it.
I can look at it oh yeah, I have seen that before. And when I travel, I have a European bird book, and then I'll put what countries I see things in.
Oh, that's
But
cool.
that's like the extent of what I do. It's like, it's just, I know I've seen it, or I know I haven't seen it. That's it.
Yeah, sometimes, like, I still use the word lifer because sometimes there's a bird that, like, I know I've never seen it before, and I'm like, oh, that's a life bird for me. Sometimes because I don't keep a list, I'll be like, ooh, I can't remember if I've seen that species of bird once years before. Maybe. I don't know.
But the fun of
So
it is,
I am,
if you don't know, it's like new all over again.
yeah, exactly. So I'm a somewhat casual birder. I'm more of the, like, slow birding, local patch birding, whatever you want to call it, type than the big lister.
Well, I like that because it's like if you get really hardcore into birding, there's not to diss on birders, but there's like really one way to do it. Like you list and you go look for rare things, and you know, there's like there's one. It's a very competitive sport. So I like that other people have different methods and different styles and different laid back, and like a whole different world of birding that often is ignored or scoffed at.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of different styles of birding. There are the people who are the hardcore, like, competitive listers, the twitchers who are like who go out in search of rare birds. But there are definitely also people who, enjoy birding but take a more, I don't know, casual, slow-paced approach to it. There's a woman called Bridget Butler who gives workshops on slow birding and things like that. So there is a community out there of birders who have rejected the fast-paced, hardcore, competitive approach to it.
I like that there's a term for it, slow birding, like slow TV. I like that.
Yeah,
nice,
yeah.
I remember, this is getting off topic, but I remember when I was at school in University of Oregon, and they had a bird festival, and I went to that. And I went on a tour, and the tour leader was taking us around it was like a retention pond area. And the idea was to talk about wetland habitat and birds. But everybody but me on the tour was a hardcore birder. And so they like started just running off, like checking birds off. And he's trying to talk about like the habitat and the different types of boring birds. And then at one point, like a turkey vulture flew really, really low, like so low we could see through its nostril.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, this is so cool. And I'm like, what's that? That's like, questions about like a female red-winged blackbird, because I'm like, I hadn't seen one before. I didn't realize that they were so dramatically different.
Yeah.
And he's like talking to me and telling me all these things, and all the rest of the group's like already halfway across the pond. And it was like at that point, I'm like, I'm not doing tours anymore because I mean, people are just too hardcore about it. So anyway, I'm glad that there's a whole other community of different sorts of birders now.
We're out there.
I could have used that when I was in college. So, on that note, I wanted to ask you, what do birds mean to you? I mean, you've like dedicated your whole career to birds. Are they just something to write about, or like? I know it's a big question.
That is a big question. It's a good question, but it's a big question. I feel like I'm really interested in, the natural world in general, and like the non-human world and ecology and how it all works and everything. And I feel like part of the appeal of birds in particular is that they are just a really easy entry point into that. There's birds everywhere you go. They're easy to see, they're fairly easy to find and identify once you know what you're doing. And so like I know you're really into like nudibranchs and stuff, but you have to live in like specific kinds of places to get into nudibranchs, whereas birding you can do anywhere. Like I will. Are you familiar with the app Merlin? Yeah. So like Merlin Sound ID, I will just like go sit out in my backyard with my coffee and just like run Merlin Sound ID to see what it picks up, because I know most of the calls and songs of local birds, but I'm not a perfect earbirder, so I don't know. You can. It's very depending on how you do birding. It can have a very low barrier to entry and be a very like easy way to start connecting with the natural world and like being more attuned to the shifts. So like if you travel to a different place, there's a different bird community there, so you start noticing more about habitats and stuff through it, and it's just a good entry point into that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, total sense, because when I was a kid, my parents made me go bird watching, like 10 years old, right? And I mean, I hated it sometimes because I wanted to watch TV, and other times I loved it because I was like all these discoveries, but no, it was totally my gateway, because first it was birds, and then I'm like, ooh, insects, nudibranchs, invertebrates, all these other cool things that exist. And so like birds are like a gateway drug into
Yeah. Oh,
deeper nature.
totally. Yeah. A lot of people start with birds and then they get into butterflies and then they get into dragonflies.
Yep,
There's like a
yep,
whole order of progression. Yep.
yep. That was me. It
Yep.
was dragonflies because when I went to school in Eugene, there's tons of wetlands, and I got
Oh,
to go
cool.
out there all the time because they had bicycle paths. I could go from my house
Yeah.
all the way out there and look at dragonflies all day long. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, dragonflies are my second after birds.
Yeah, I definitely have a book like Dragon Flying Through Binoculars or something.
Yep,
So,
yep,
yep.
yep. The trajectory.
Yeah, so I've gone on that trajectory myself in the past as well.
So let's talk about your book. I want to know
Yes.
how did it come about? Because obviously you've been writing about birds for a while, and um, so
Yeah.
I had to say I'm like another book about bird migration, really? But then I started looking at it because I mean my shelf is full.
It is different from all the
It
other
is.
books about
And
bird
that's why when I
migration.
started looking at it, I'm like, oh, this is really different. This is actually really interesting. So
It talks about World War II and the space race and the Human Genome Project and all this stuff you never thought would be in a book about bird migration.
right. So it's not about bird migration. I mean, it is.
No.
But it's about all these. Yeah. So tell us how this book
Okay.
came about.
Yeah. So pre-COVID, I was working full-time for the American Ornithological Society, which is a big professional organization for scientists who study birds. You know, they publish scholarly journals and they put on an annual conference and give research grants. And I was their communications person. And a big part of that was promoting the new research being published in their journals, like writing blog posts about it and press releases and stuff like that. And so I was talking to all these researchers, getting to like meet and speak with all these people doing cool bird science over the country or all over the country, and then writing, you know, accessible translations of their research. And I kept getting really fascinated with the methods sections of some of these papers. I either didn't know, or if I had learned as an undergraduate, I had in an ornithology class a long time ago, I had forgotten that you can study bird migration using weather radar, and you can study bird migration by analyzing hydrogen isotopes in bird feathers, and you can study bird migration by putting out microphones at night to autonomously record the calls of birds passing overhead. And I thought all of this was really cool, and started wondering what's the science behind this, and who even figured out that some of these things were possible? Like, who figured out that you could study bird migration by analyzing deuterium in bird feathers? That's just wild. And you know, I was interested in writing, and I had always thought like maybe someday I'll write a popular science book about birds. But as you noted, there have been a lot of popular science books written about birds, and at some point it occurred to me that all of the techniques used to study migration and how they work might make an interesting premise for a book that no one else had written yet. And what nudged me to really pursue that was COVID. COVID combined with other things, because around the start of COVID, I actually also was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so I had a 2-year-old. And so pandemic childcare and cancer treatment and full-time job, one thing had to go. So I left my job. I'm fine now, by the way. I've been in remission for 2.5 years. It's all good. But so I started writing a book proposal, because apparently 2-year-old and cancer treatment was not enough. So I started writing a book proposal in my spare time. And it was successful. I got wildly lucky with finding an agent and a publisher. The stars just kind of aligned, and now there's a book. And so, yeah, what the book does is it goes through all the different ways that scientists have come up with to study migration over the years, which is actually really interesting, because they've done some really wild, surprising things over time to kind of figure out what the deal is with bird migration, and borrowed stuff from a whole lot of other fields. So like I said, the space race plays a prominent role in one chapter, and the Human Genome Project plays a prominent role in another chapter. And it goes to some unexpected and interesting places, at least I think so.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to read it all the way yet, because I've been busy with my book. But one of I was flipping through it. One of the ones that I found really interesting was the one about the moon watching.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about that? Because that is just fascinating.
Yes. So this is a way of studying migration that's kind of obsolete now. It doesn't get used a lot anymore because other higher tech methods have come along and replaced it. But so a lot of people don't know that most songbirds migrate at night. They kind of rest up during the day and then migrate at night. And so there was this guy in the 40s and 50s named George Lowry, who lived in Louisiana, who was an ornithologist, and was looking for a way to prove that birds migrated over the Gulf of Mexico on a regular basis, because there was but there was some debate about this at the time. And he came up with a way of doing this by pointing a telescope at the full moon during bird migration and counting the silhouettes of birds that he saw passing in front of the full moon. And with some math that he got help with from an astronomer, he could use this to quantify bird migration. and compare how much bird migration was going on at one time and place and how much was going on at another time and place. And he actually ended up scaling this up to the point where he got thousands of volunteers all over the country in the early 50s to collect this moon watching data on a couple nights in October. And it was basically the first continent-wide look at bird migration patterns. It was really cool. And then one of his grad students figured out how to use weather radar to do the same thing, and moon watching died an early death. But it was neat while it lasted.
Yeah, it's so sad because it's so like beautiful and poetic.
Yeah.
Watching bird silhouettes against the moon. I mean,
for science.
For science. And now it's all like technological and kind of.
Yeah.
The magic is not quite, the same as the moon.
I mean, I think it's still pretty magical. I got to go out in the field with some scientists doing bird stuff when I was working on the book, and it's still pretty fun.
That's fun. And we think about bird banding. Everybody knows about bird banding. You stick flag on a bird, and then they fly off, and then they get documented. But like, there's so many other methods of studying them that we don't ever really think about. And we like radar, or not the radar, the radio transmitters. Like,
oh yeah,
we see nature documentaries too, but like this book is full of different. How many? I mean, there's like a dozen different techniques and things that we don't ever really think about or know about.
Yeah, it kind of turned into. I've joked that this book is basically a history of all of the major technological developments of the last century, as told through the history of bird migration research. Because ornithologists have really borrowed from everything in their pursuit of figuring out bird migration. So it's pretty fun.
That's fun. What was your favorite story?
The moon watching one is up there, but honestly, I know radio telemetry, like you said, the radio transmitters is something that a lot of people are already familiar with, but the radio telemetry chapter might be my favorite one in the whole book, just because the guy who developed radio telemetry for wildlife, his name was Bill Cochran, was just such a character. And my favorite story in the whole book might be Bill Cochran following a thrush with a radio transmitter on it that had a range of a few miles, so he had to stay relatively near this bird. So he followed it from Illinois on migration all the way up until it crossed the border into Canada for a week in a station wagon with a hole cut in the top for his radio receiver. This was in the 70s. Like, I read the dry 2-page scientific paper recounting this and my jaw dropped. Like, someone actually did that? But yes, and he repeated that a number of times over the years with other birds and had many wild adventures. He was quite a character.
What did he do if it rained?
I don't know.
That is quite a character.
He just passed away last year, but at the age of 90, I think. But he was still around when I was researching my book, so I got to talk to him, and I actually got to visit him in his home in Illinois. And oh my goodness, did he have stories? Yeah. And now every time I give this talk to an audience that has ornithologists, every time someone in the audience has a Bill Cochran story. Like, someone could write an entire book just about Bill Cochran, and yeah.
That's funny. Is that your next book?
I don't know, but because he was like the guy who figured out how to make like wildlife telemetry feasible. So for several decades, he was like the person doing telemetry with birds, basically. So a lot of people who've been working in the field for a while encountered him at some point, and he was very memorable. So everyone has a story about him.
That's not going to be me. I'm not going to be memorable like that.
I gave a book talk in Santa Barbara where a lot of the work with recapturing the last wild condors and getting ready to do a captive breeding program was done. And after my talk, someone comes up to me and says, I worked on the condor program. Do you know who built the transmitters for the first condors that we released back into the wild? And I was like, don't tell me. It was Bill, wasn't it? Yes. Bill had flown out to California to help the condor people.
It's like, was it 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, but 6 Degrees of Bill Cochran?
Yes.
In the bird world. But did his work extend to like mammals and stuff too?
Early on it did, yeah. He got his start building transmitters for rabbits and stuff, but I think his heart was definitely with the birds. Most of his work over the years was with birds.
But I'm sure his work has migrated to other fields.
Yeah, he was basically the first person who built, actual usable radio transmitters to put on wildlife, period. So any wildlife, including birds.
It's fascinating. So
other people had tried it, but he was the first person to really like get it working well. And he never patented anything he did. He like never got rich off of this. He would like invite people to come stay in his spare room and learn how to build transmitters in his garage workshop. He was a really unique guy. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's hard to find people like that anymore.
Yeah.
So my mouse has gone off. I have two screens. One of them, my screen up there, is broadcasting the Monterey Bay Aquarium's live feed of the giant spider crabs.
Nice.
I'm like, got my giant spider crabs. What were some of the most challenging stories in the book that you wrote about?
Ooh, probably the chapter that I felt like was the hardest to get written and have turn out well was the one on the bird gene escape project, which is that's the one where the human genome project comes up. It's these folks who were working on mapping genetic diversity within bird species in North America. So sort of like 23andMe for birds, how you could take a 23andMe test and find out roughly where your ancestors come from. There's genetic diversity that like within species, like between geographic areas. So they're trying to collect DNA samples via feathers from like all across the breeding range of, say, a Wilson's warbler, and do this analysis. And then once they get it done, you can collect a feather from a Wilson's warbler on migration or in its wintering range and analyze its genes and figure out which breeding population it's from. And for some reason, that was just the chapter that was hardest to like find a way into. And my husband somewhere has a photo of me like on my living room floor where I had printed out my draft of the chapter and like cut it up into paragraphs, like physically on paper, and was like rearranging the paragraphs on the floor, trying to figure out in what order to tell the different parts of the story.
Yeah, I've had chapters like that. It's usually, I feel like it's usually with something that I don't quite, like my mind can't grasp. Like genomes for me, that would definitely be up there.
Yeah, genetics gives me a headache. So It's like, how do I explain this?
I think mine was in Nature Obscura. It was about the chemical compounds in flowers and how moths detect them.
Oh, cool!
It took me forever to really like. Chemistry was not not my thing, and so figuring out like understanding the volatiles and how they worked and how they moved through the air and everything, that was challenging.
Yeah,
but I have to say I mean, I've read a lot of scientific papers too for my book research, but I usually skip over the methods part. And so, like, having you say,
I love
like,
methods.
Right? Like, you wrote a whole book just because you read the methods. And so now I'm not going to ever skip over the methods again.
I've this is a pattern that's continued. I've just become someone who loves methods. I write sometimes for Bird Note, which is a daily, like, short snippet radio show that's syndicated, and it's also a podcast. It's like a little 2-minute snippet about birds every day. And so like I wrote a script for them about a project where some researchers were studying woodpeckers, of how they caught the woodpeckers coming out of their holes in the trees by like hoisting mist nets up into the canopy with fishing poles and stuff. Like I've become a devotee of odd scientific methods. It's my favorite thing now.
And there's no end of it.
Yes.
It's fun because it's like they're very creative in their it's not like there's a tool. It's not like a car part. They have to come up with these piecemeal sort of techniques and use whatever works. And I mean, fishing poles.
Yeah, one of the scientists who appears in my book just sent me a new paper that he'd done where they raised sibling godwits, which are shorebirds. Like they got a group of siblings from the same clutch and hand raised them in captivity, and then released them into wild populations like a couple thousand kilometers apart to see whether they would migrate according to the different routes of the populations that they had been introduced to, or whether they would take the migratory routes of the parents that they had been taken from, to figure out whether, you know, migratory routes are genetic or are based on learning from birds around you. And they did follow the paths of the birds of the populations that they'd been released into, which is really cool. But I also just found the aspect of like raising bird siblings in captivity and then releasing them in different places. Like I love methods now.
Yeah, I feel like I've missed out on a whole lot in my life by skipping over the methods.
Skipping the methods, yeah. Don't skip the methods section. There's some gems in there.
Go to the analysis and figure out what they found. Still on the birds topic, I wanted to ask you. So I live in Seattle.
Yep.
And for people who don't know, Washington is roughly divided in half by the Cascades. There's the nice half, which is nice and cool and green, and then there's the east half, which is where you live.
I'll give it to you. I recently drove from here to the San Juan Islands and back, and I did refer to I live in the Walla Walla area, which I think is quite nice, but we drove through a lot of wastelands. It felt like to get from here to there. So I can't really blame you. You're not wrong.
I know the west of the Mountainers are like, east? Oh no, don't go east.
Walla Walla's nice. The rest of it's a little
Wait, were you just telling me that it was super hot over there?
Yeah, it was 102 degrees here this week. It's fine. It's fine.
So anyway, so even though we're in the same state, our habitats are completely different.
Yes.
So we're on the Sound, so we have lots of water and forests and typical Pacific Northwest habitat. And it's we don't think of Eastern Washington as Pacific Northwest habitat.
Yes.
It's very dry and it's very hot. And,
yes.
And
it's
you
a
have
desert.
ticks.
We do not. I have seen one tick since I moved to the Northwest. In 10 years of living in Eastern Oregon and Eastern Washington, one tick. We don't have that many ticks.
Well,
who told you we have ticks?
I found ticks. I went to Pothole State Park.
Oh, okay.
And at the part of the Columbia National Wildlife Refuge.
Yeah.
And I threw away my
ticks
pants. They were huge. They were giant ticks, and they were all in the seams of my pants. And I stripped my pants off in the parking lot, and I put them in a bag, and I threw them away because, there's ticks. Maybe not in Walla.
The Blue Mountains, in my experience, are not bad for ticks. That's kind of the region that I've lived in ever since I moved out here.
So maybe I'll come out there one day. But
it's pretty nice.
So anyway, I do want to ask you. You're saying it's nice.
I think this is leading to a question eventually.
It is leading to a question. I want to know more about your habitat. If I come to Walla Walla, what am I going to see? Is it what's the habitat like? What are the birds like? What's it other than being hot? What's it like?
Yeah, whenever someone from a different part of the country asks me where I live, I never just say Washington State. I always say Eastern Washington, because otherwise they're going to assume that I live in the Seattle area, and it takes about 5 hours to drive to Seattle from here. So I live in kind of the southeastern corner of Washington, kind of on the edge of where the dry wheatland part of the state meets the Blue Mountains, which is this little low mountain range in southeastern Washington, northeastern Oregon. And so where I live is a very nice little river valley nestled up against the mountains, where they grow a lot of wine and a lot of fruit and stuff. But yeah, it's a lot of desert scrub, sage, a lot of which has now been converted into wheat production and onion production. People have heard of Walla Walla sweet onions, and wine is a huge industry here now. And then up in the Blue Mountains, if I were to drive east from my house for 45 minutes, I would be in ponderosa pines and firs and stuff like that. So
you do have some actual mountains.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, there's actual mountains. They're not super tall, but when you drive up into them, they feel fairly mountainy. You're up in evergreen forests with the Steller's jays and the mountain chickadees and the
So you have mountain habitat, mountain wildlife, but also the more scrubland habitat. So you got
actually, we were talking about listing with birders. Some birders who I know locally who are avid listers have told me that Walla Walla often has the highest total of birds observed in the county of any county in the state of Washington, because the habitat in Walla Walla County it includes a little piece of the Columbia River and the Columbia River wetlands, and then we've got the sagebrush and stuff, and then it goes all the way up into the mountains. So because there's this elevational gradient in the county, you actually get a really wide variety of habitats and a wide variety of birds pretty close by.
That's cool. That's neat.
Yeah.
So what kind of birds do you have in your backyard?
Ooh, my best yard bird is calliope hummingbirds.
Oh. Okay,
yeah. The hummingbirds that stick around in our backyard all summer are black-shinned hummingbirds, but in spring when we have our feeder up, we usually for a week get rufous and calliope showing up in our backyard as well. Wow. I live in right in the middle of town, so that's by far that's my coolest yard bird. But easily findable around town in places that I go all the time are lazuli buntings. Yellow warblers are by far the most common warbler here. We have a lot of chats. We have a lot of magpies, which I really enjoy because I'm from the eastern half of the country where there aren't any magpies. A lot of Swainson socks, which is another bird that I didn't grow up with. So now every time I see a Swainson sock flying over my house, it makes me happy. So yeah, a lot of those kind of grassland, forest edge birds.
That's a lot of those we don't have here in Seattle.
Yeah.
Definitely no calliope's. And magpies, they don't come over the mountains, so you have to go east to see them.
Come to Walla Walla in like May, and it will change your opinion of Eastern Washington because it's not brown and hot. And like May and June are nice because it's not brown and hot and dry yet, and like all the good birds are here. And yeah.
All right, I'll come one time. I'll come. And I'll try to stop trashing Eastern Washington. Except Pothole State Park. I'm never going back there again.
I don't blame you.
I was traumatized by those ticks.
No, the Umatilla National Forest is much nicer.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. There's no ticks, right?
I have seen one. I have heard rumors of other people running into ticks, but I have seen one tick crawling on another person ever in the decade that I've been living in the Blue Mountains region.
Was it one of the big ones, or was it a small one?
I don't remember.
Because the big ones, like, they were big. They were big. Like, I've seen people, scientists on Twitter, like, oh, look, all these ticks on my socks, and they're like little seeds, right? They're tiny. These things were big. And they were crawling
I'm so sorry.
everywhere, all over me. And none of them got through, because fortunately I was dressed in layers.
That's good.
Even though it was hot, I still had multiple layers on, and so I was saved, like, the ultimate tick adventure. But anyway, I don't want to talk about ticks anymore. Now I'm scared.
Walla Walla is a wine tourism town too, so we've got all the wineries and all the good restaurants for the wine tourists, and then you can go out and see your lazuli buntings and whatnot. So it's great.
And no ticks.
And not that I've seen. I'm sure they're around somewhere, but
not giant fields of them. Yeah. Anyway, let's talk about birds some more. So I know you're not a huge bird lister, but are there birds that you like really still want to see that you haven't seen yet?
Ooh, until the past year, I would have said Lewis's woodpecker, which is, are you familiar with Lewis's woodpeckers? For people who aren't, they are a pink and green woodpecker. Literally, they are pink and green, and they fly like a crow, and they act like a flycatcher. Like, they'll sit out on open branches and fly catch. They are the weirdest woodpecker in North America. I think there's just nothing else. There's no other woodpecker that's pink and green and flies like a crow and eats like a flycatcher. They're just super strange. And I had known that they passed through here on migration, but not in large numbers, and I'd never been lucky enough to see one. And then in February of this year, I guess it was, I was at the San Diego Birding Festival because I was invited to be a speaker there. And I saw one there out on the tour. Like, I went out on a birding tour while I was there, and they pulled the bus over by the road and was like, hey, we're stopping because there's been a Lewis's woodpecker hanging out in this tree. And we all traipsed out of the bus, and there was the Lewis's woodpecker. And I gather they're not very common there. I was not expecting to see one, so I was shocked and amazed and delighted. And then this spring, I was hiking in the Blue Mountains with my husband and my kid, who's 5, and we were walking through this clearing in the trees on the side of a mountain. And what flew out of the woods and perched in one of the trees in this open meadow area, but a Lewis's woodpecker. And there's another one. So now I've seen 2 in the last year, one of which I even saw myself without a guide driving me to it in a bus. So, but as for birds that I haven't seen yet, that I really would like to see, it's a really hard one. Ooh, hooded warbler. I heard them singing in Pennsylvania in June, but I did not see one. And I feel like it doesn't really count as a life bird if you don't see it. So, hooded warbler.
I feel that when I went to Finland, I could hear cuckoos, and I never could find one. And so I'm like, it feels incomplete somehow. Like,
exactly.
Yes, I heard it, but it's not enough. I wanted.
Yeah, I was very pleased that on the same field trip where I heard the hooded warblers, I did in fact see a cerulean warbler. I would have been very sad if those also either. Those are one of these birds where if you see them in a field guide, they're like this beautiful sky blue. When you're looking at one from underneath, when it's way up in the tops of the trees, because that's where they hang out, you can't really see the sky blue, but I could see it well enough to tell what I was looking at. But the hooded warblers, I only heard. I didn't see one. Darn it.
You gotta try again.
Yes.
Of course.
And those are eastern
yeah,
birds. I went to a ornithology conference in Pennsylvania in June. So
that's what birders call nemesis birds, right?
Yes.
My nemesis bird. Well, do you have a favorite bird then? Like, what's your most fun bird that you like to see?
I get asked that a lot. My stock answer is the calliope hummingbird, which is the one I already mentioned as being my best yard bird. These are the smallest hummingbird in North America. They're very tiny. And the males, their gorget, the iridescent feathers on their neck is like streaked. They have these like purple stripes, and they're just really unique and beautiful. And I was very, very excited the first time I saw my lifer calliope hummingbird, which I saw in southeastern Arizona long before I moved out west. And so now it's just delightful to me that I see them in my yard every year.
um, what bird do you think is most interesting though? Like what like whether it's like life history or looks or like folklore or stories about it, what?
That's an impossible question. All birds are interesting. Come on. Gosh.
Well, they might all be interesting, but what like which one really like gets your goat?
Okay, this is a really random answer, but right now I have recently become fascinated with the fact that there is a population of great gray owls in the Sierra Nevadas in California, because these are these owls that are they have a like a circumpolar distribution, like they're around like the boreal regions of North America and Eurasia. They're very much like a boreal up north cold weather bird, and there's this one population of them in California that's like way further south than any other group of great gray owls, and they're genetically distinct from all the other populations of great gray owls. And so I have a whole bunch of papers about the California population of great gray owls bookmarked that I want to read.
Interesting. How did they get
So,
there? That's weird.
I don't know. Yeah.
They just migrate like we're out of here. We're rebelling.
I mean, there's some pretty high mountains, so they presumably could have just kind of followed mountains down from, Canada. But,
yeah, that's a long way to go. I mean,
yeah.
Didn't like the family or what? I mean,
I don't know. Yeah, so there's this one weird population of great gray owls that decided to move to California.
Most people don't want to move to California. Okay. What other sorts of nature do you get really excited about besides birds?
I'm kind of into native plants, which is related to birds because it's all, it's all bird habitat. We, since the beginning of 2020, about half of what was originally grass lawn at our house has been ripped out and planted with native plants. So I'm working on improving bird and insect habitat in my yard via adding a lot more native plants. And this spring, I went on a couple of field trips up into the Blue Mountains with the local native plant group, which was fun to like walk around in the mountains with some mostly ladies my mom's age looking for wildflowers. So that I like plants and I like flowers. And back when I was doing outdoor education in Ohio, I was even among like all the other naturalist interns at the place where I was working. I was kind of known as like the person who knew what all the wildflowers were. So.
Yeah, that's a lot of work to go from one region to a whole different region to learn a whole new set of wildflowers.
Yeah, I don't know them as well because like now I have a 5-year-old and everything, so I've not put as much effort into like learning all the wildflowers here. But when I lived in Ohio and Wisconsin, I knew like a lot of the plants, and I'm still gradually learning more of them here.
And so you're rewilding your yard, I guess.
Yeah.
And making it into habitat. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
I've been in this house for 10 years, and I've been doing the same thing ever since I moved here. And there's no more lawn at all anymore. It's all been taken. Well,
nice.
Except the grass, like there's like patches of it that still keep trying to grow. And
yeah,
God, it's hard to kill. It's all these people watering their lawns. I'm like, do you know how hard it is to kill grass? Because it makes me want to cry when it pops up.
Yeah, that stupid Bermuda grass.
Yes, it's tenacious.
It's the worst.
It's the worst weed. I mean, everything else is fine, but that and the morning glory just.
Oh God, morning glory!
Yeah.
Ugh, boo.
Yeah, it comes in.
But yeah, my alley. Yeah, but yet my yard now is full of goldenrods and asters and prairie smoke and native red columbine and snowberry and milkweed and all that sort of stuff. So it's been fun. Yeah.
I've got a lot of the same. The goldenrod is blooming right now, and it's just full of bees.
Yeah.
And then I know. So I love. So my degree was in landscape architecture, and when I did that, I focused a lot on wildlife habitat design, and so I've carried that over from my school, and so I really in fact my website began by talking about wildlife habitat and how to do wildlife habitat. Anyway, long story short, there's a lot of like really fun things you can do with your yard to create habitat, and of course a lot of people make habitat for butterflies or birds. But when you create native habitat, it benefits everybody. I mean, the invertebrates and all the way up to the birds. And the cool thing about wildlife gardening is that you can be like a really lazy gardener. Like you don't have to mow the lawn. You don't have to water once the plants are established because you're using native plants and they're, well, climate change aside, are adapted for the landscape where they are.
Yeah, we do water ours some, but not as much as we would need to if it was grass.
Right. And then and like for goldenrod and things like that, you don't like most people would cut them down when they're done blooming because they're.
Oh no, you just let them go.
Yeah, so you let them.
You want the seed heads so
right.
that more of them will grow. Yeah.
Yep, the seeds provide like I get sparrows and chickadees and all kinds of birds out there in the goldenrod
Oh,
in
yeah.
the fall, and so much so that now I don't have any feeders out at all anymore.
Yeah, we do a hummingbird feeder, but we don't do any other like seed bird feeders. I would rather just have the seeds growing on plants because bird feeders are really hard to keep clean. I feel like a lot of people just casually put out bird feeders and don't know that to do it right, you really have to like bleach them once a week. Like
Right.
it's really hard to actually keep seed feeders as clean as they need to be for it to be okay for the birds.
Right.
So we've given up on that.
A lot of people.
The hummingbird feeder I can take apart and put in the dishwasher, so that's fine. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
I was talking to somebody just the other day about bird feeders, and like, yeah, well, you're supposed to like we wash them out once a week. He's like, I don't do that. You really need to, especially when the diseases start to go around.
Yeah, bird feeders are kind of gross.
And plus, on top of that, my next door neighbors have cats that they let outside. And so they started hunting when the bird feeders were out. So I took I saw one of the cats caught a flicker right outside my window one day.
Oh God!
And I swear I'd never heard a bird scream like that before. It was the most horrifying sound. A dead flicker. So anyway, so I don't feed the birds anymore except for native habitat and you still get so many. People are like, well, I gotta feed the birds because, with the bird feeder, that's how they come, right? And, like, there's so many birds that come to my yard.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what I get in my yard is just determined by, like, the neighborhood around my house, too. But we get both species of goldfinch and house finches and song sparrows and white-crowned sparrows and occasionally towies and juncos and flickers. And, yeah, it's fun.
And so, like, in addition to planting seed plants like goldenrod or aster or whatever because they like to eat those, but a lot of the plants, even goldenrod and like fireweed, they produce like the seed heads that are so fluffy, and then the birds use those for their nests.
Yeah, we have fireweed in our yard now, which delights me because I didn't plant that one. Like fireweed had just sprouted in the middle of the bed that we had planted with other native plants, and I was just like, cool! The more the merrier. Welcome, fireweed. And now it started spreading. I suppose if it gets too aggressive, we might end up yanking some of it out. Like we have showy milkweed, and that is spread quite a bit, and it's beautiful, but it might hit a point where we pull out some stalks to kind of fight it back so it doesn't take over everything else. It's a balancing act. But yes, I was delighted when I was like, what is this? Oh my gosh, it's fireweed. Where did this come from?
Maybe from my yard. I mean, I see it like when the wind blows, it's just like this tufts of white that's like floating away up into the sky.
Oh, same with the milkweed. Yeah, the milkweed fluff is wild.
See, milkweed, that's an interesting one because in Puget Sound area, we don't have a native milkweed. So we're like one of the only places in the whole country that have no monarchs because we have no milkweed.
There's not really monarchs that come through Walla Walla specifically. I guess there are a few that go through the Tri-Cities west of here, but like a couple years ago, someone found a monarch caterpillar out by the reservoir outside Walla Walla, and it was like a big deal among the local naturalists because that's not normal here. So everyone sees that I have milkweed in my yard and is like, oh, is it for the monarchs? And I'm like, I would love to see a monarch in my yard, but like a lot of other butterflies and things like nectar on the milkweed flowers, like it's for whatever wants to use it.
It's not exclusive.
Yes, lots of species actually use milkweed, not just monarchs. We get swallowtails and stuff coming through to check out the milkweed all the time.
That's
so
good. That's
when
nice.
It's blooming.
What other kind of wildlife do you get in your yard then? Butterflies, birds.
Occasionally we get deer in our yard, which really surprised us at first because we don't live in a place we live on a busy street that's all houses and stuff. So we were very surprised the first time we woke up early in the morning and looked out the window and there were deer in our backyard, and then we found scat out there a couple times since then. So there's a creek bed not too far away, and I think they walk up the creek corridor from somewhere else, and so that's been interesting. Let's see, we've had possums in our yard. Once we found a garter snake out there. I really hope they come back and start hanging out in our yard more now that we're making more habitat out there. Yeah, I don't know. It's fun. Lots of insects, lots of bees and butterflies and stuff.
You gotta start documenting those insects. I want more details.
Yeah. Well, a friend last year gave us one sunflower plant as a gift, like a little seedling in a pot. And like these are not technically a native plant to this area, but I like our yard is not exclusively natives. I love sunflowers, so we planted that. And now this year we have a whole beautiful patch of sunflowers as a result of just leaving the seeds out there. We have a whole bunch of volunteers. Those get more native bees on them than all the actual native plants anywhere in the yard. God, bees love those things. It's I think there's one that's literally called, like, my husband actually uses iNaturalist a lot more than I do. So he was the one taking pictures of all of the different native bees and putting them into iNaturalist. I think there's one that was literally called like a chimney sunflower bee or something, which was really funny because the sunflowers were growing right around our chimney. And we're like, that's okay. So it's a chimney sunflower bee. That's all right. So that's been fun.
Appropriate name.
Yes. It's on a sunflower by our chimney. I like it.
I grew sunflowers one year, and then nothing happened. They never came back.
Oh yeah, I wasn't sure what would happen, but I was delighted when like a lot of them sprouted this year. So now we have a whole bunch of sunflowers, and I hope it keeps going.
I wish mine did, because I just let them go. I'm like, come on, more sunflowers, and then the neighbors got sunflowers. So it's like the birds took the sunflower seeds over to the neighbor's yard, and they got sunflowers. So I was offended. I'm like, but what about my yard? I've got like habitat and no cats.
Yeah. Oh man.
But I like that you said that about the non-natives, because a lot of people are very, very like stringent. Like, it has to be only natives.
No, I love sunflowers. I'm happy to have sunflowers out there.
I threw out like this fairy garden mix one year, and one of the plants that came up was this hollyhock. I don't have any particular interest in hollyhocks, but what I found was that there's this very specific, it's like a silvery weevil, and they're very, very, very tiny. And these like 2 plants of hollyhocks grow every year, and every single year I get these weevils on them. And so I'm like, I get so excited about these like hollyhocks, because I'm like, it's weevil time! And
that's amazing. I love it.
They're so cute, and they're so tiny. And when the hollyhocks start to, they go to seed, and then there's like a big mating orgy of the weevils. So like you get like a whole stack of like 3 or 4 or 5 weevils all like piled on top of each other.
Oh my goodness.
It's weevil time.
Weevils making more weevils.
But I think it's fascinating, because like they don't leave and come back. They stay with the plant. Like they go into the roots, or the eggs are in the roots or whatever. So like they're one with the plant. So if I got rid of that plant, then the weevils would go too. And it's not like if you build it, they will come. They were there. They stay there. They're not going anywhere. So I like knowing that like my little weevils are out there right now. I mean, I might not see them, but every year they're gonna hold up a whole new generation of new weevils. And I don't know, it's kind of fun to like, because it's right outside my front door. So I'm like, there's my little weevils. And they're probably not native either, but whatever. They're my little friends.
Yeah, that's great.
So we got about 10 minutes left. So I want to ask you, like, what else are you working on, and what are you working on? What's coming up? It's really hard, like, once you finish a book, because you finished it like months and months and months ago, and then
it came out in March.
So you've already been like done with it. Only now you're like promoting it and stuff. It's like a weird time for writers, because like we're done, but we're not done.
I'm still giving a lot of book talks. Birds are a good topic in that regard, because all the Audubon chapters and all the birding festivals are looking for speakers. So I still get invited to do book talks on a regular basis. At the end of September, I'm actually going to be in Seattle. I mentioned to you briefly earlier, because I'm going to be the keynote for Audubon Washington's annual statewide convention. So that's fun. But yeah, I do other freelancing as well. So I write pretty regularly for the Cornell Lab of Ornithology magazine. I think I mentioned I'm a contributor to BirdNote Radio. I write sometimes for like Audubon. I've done stuff on and off for the American Birding Conservancy. I have an ongoing freelance gig, a few hours a week, doing communications for the Wilson Ornithological Society, which is one of the like smaller competitor bird societies to the one that I used to work for full time. So yeah, I'm basically a full-time ornithology freelancer, which it's weird that you can kind of make a living just as a freelance bird writer, but that's basically what I do. And I do hope to write a second book eventually. I have an idea that I'm working on, but you know how it goes, and it'll depend in large part on how this book sells. So buy my book.
Buy lots of copies.
Yes. Buy 3 copies.
Buy it for your friends too.
Yes. Tell your friends.
But it seems to be doing well. I mean, I've seen it a lot of places out and about, except for my local bookshop, which didn't have it, so I had to order it.
Boo.
I was like, every time I go there, I'm like, do you have this book? It's by my friend. Like, no, we don't have that one. I'm like, you need it to have it. You know, you need it in your shop. So yeah, so are you doing? You just had a vacation, right?
Yeah, we just last week were on Orcas Island up in the Sound for a few days, which was a lot of fun.
Do you have more travel other than book talks?
No, we don't have any more fun family travel booked right now. I guess I'm thinking about that. Like, because some things you have to like plan way in advance if you want to have any choice of where you're going to stay. But yeah, we were actually it was supposed to be a longer road trip. We were going to do North Cascades National Park first, which I had never been to, and then drive across from there to Anacortes to take the ferry out to the islands. And then my 5-year-old came down with conjunctivitis. So the first half of the trip did not happen, but antibiotic eye drops are amazing and take effect really quickly. So we were still able to like leave early. Like it was supposed to be a whole week, and instead it turned into leaving super early on Wednesday morning to drive up to catch the ferry that we had a reservation on to go to the islands. So we still got to do the second half of the trip. That was good.
San Juan Island?
Yeah, no, we were on Orcas Island.
Orcas Island, okay.
Which is one of the San Juan Islands,
right.
plural. Yeah.
I have not been to Orcas, but I have been to San Juan Island.
I've been to San Juan Island years ago. I was actually where we went on our honeymoon, but we hadn't been to any of the other ones, so we went back and did Orcas Island, and I think it was by far my 5-year-old's favorite trip that we have ever taken him on. He really enjoyed it. So,
did you get to see anything fun?
I mean, I didn't really go do any birding or anything while I was there, but Orcas Island has the highest point in the San Juans, and you can drive up there, and there's an observation tower, and so it's really cool. You've got like the whole Puget Sound, like all the way to Canada, kind of laid out beneath you. You have this amazing view, and it's the biggest one of the islands, and it has a state park with some interior freshwater lakes, and on one of them you can rent canoes. So we spent some time just paddling around on this lake with our kid in the middle of the canoe, and my son and husband fished from the canoe, and I don't know, ate a lot of seafood and ice cream. It was really great.
I need to go there. It's like I have lived here for a while, and I still haven't been to Orcas Island.
It was fun. I would recommend it. It's less, it's less populated, so as a result, a little bit less like there's a lot of tourists, but a little bit less touristy feeling than Friday Harbor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Friday Harbor is fun. They have a really good dock.
Yeah.
For dock fouling. That's how I judge places now. Like,
nice.
Can I see nudie pranks there or not? So I don't know about the docks on Orcas Island. I'll have to look at that.
There's probably somewhere where you could find nudibranchs. I don't know.
I hope so. Well, if there's low tide, I mean, it depends on low tide. But the nice thing about dock fouling is you don't have to wait for low tide because you can go anytime.
Oh, yeah.
The docks are floating, so they're always on the water. But a lot of docks are private, so you're not able to go. But Friday Harbor has a big public area. So you can just wander out and lay down on the dock and start looking around, and people look at you.
Nice. I did some of that back in my environmental education days, I lived on a barrier island on the coast of Georgia, teaching at a 4-H environmental education center. And so one of the things we did with the kids there was dock fouling organisms. So I've done some of that.
Good. A lot of people don't know about it, and it's just and it's easy and it's fun, and you can always find of course, as long as you live near a coast or somewhere with docks, it's somewhere to always go. Like I said, you don't have to wait for low tide, and low tide is very seasonal and it's very, especially here. It's like you're not going to see much unless it's a really decent low tide.
Yeah.
So and those are very limited. There's only like a handful of those a year. So docks are a lot of fun to. I just like they're peaceful. It's like you get the boat sounds and the creaking and like the nice rocking of the like without being on a boat, you get the docks kind of rocking and birds. Like lots of birds that if you're laying on the docks, like the pigeon guillemots and the the cormorants, they'll like swim right next to you.
Yeah, I loved seeing the guillemots from the ferry going to and from the island. That was fun.
There's a lot of good shorebirds too. We got the rhinoceros auklets too.
Oh, cool! I'm not sure I've ever seen a rhinoceros auklet. That's cool.
They're really cool. Of course, they have the little weird beak thing going on. Puget sounds pretty good for birds, orcas, sea lions, everything.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
It's good to finally meet you.
Yeah, you too. Me, you know, sort of.
Well, I'm sure our paths will cross at some point again.
Yeah, I mean, we live in the same state, so eventually.
Those mountains.
Just opposite corners.
You never know about the mountains, especially during the winter. It's like,
oh yeah, sometimes I love. Yeah, as someone who grew up in the eastern half of the country where there are not mountains like this, it still amuses me that there are times in winter when you just cannot drive from one side of Washington to the other.
yep,
Because all the passes are closed.
yep, they actually closed down. Like, people don't understand. Like, it really is a divider.
Yeah, you can't get there from here. You can't unless you want to go all the way through Portland, which takes like 8 hours.
Yeah. Well, yeah, even then, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, thank you. It was fun to talk. I'm looking forward to reading the rest of your book. Yeah, so thank you.